Trump rally knows, and I've been to so many of them. They're inspiring events. They're great events. There's a lot of love of country. This is going to be very, very different. From the White House, we found out that President Biden has spoken with Israel's President Isaac Herzog.
Just now, Kayleigh McEnany stunned viewers as she announced her departure from Fox News with a speech that captured every eye and ear. Her exit wasn't just a simple goodbye. It was charged with passion and left the audience utterly speechless. She delivered her final words with such powerful emotion and intensity, signaling that this was far from a regular farewell. This remarkable moment is sure to be etched in the annals of TV history. Before we explore this further, it's evident that the consequences are more alarming than previously thought, and this is just the beginning of what will shock you. Harris, under McEnany's lens. McEnany has always been known for her bold approach, never afraid to speak her mind. Recently, she stirred up attention with her outspoken criticism of Vice President Kamala Harris. She didn't just lightly criticize Harris. She dug deep into what she felt were her biggest shortcomings, particularly focusing on economic issues. Although these critiques caught many by surprise, the full extent of what she said still hasn't been widely discussed. But now, her thoughts on Harris are beginning to come to light, and they reveal some strong, pointed opinions. What we uncover next about McEnany's fierce critique will undoubtedly reshape your view of political discourse. During a detailed interview, McEnany shared her views on Harris's approach to economic policies, specifically warning about the potential negative effects on middle-class Americans. She argued strongly against Harris's proposed fiscal changes, especially her intention to reverse the tax deductions that were put in place during Donald Trump's presidency. According to McEnany, these changes could bring about higher taxes and financial challenges for everyday citizens. One of McEnany's key points was that, despite Harris's claims of supporting the middle and lower-income families, the reality of her policies could tell a different story. She explained that such policies might lead to increased taxes, fewer job opportunities, and overall economic instability. To back up her argument, McEnany shared some numbers. Under Trump's leadership, people earning between $5,000 and $50,000 saw a tax cut of 16%, while those making between $50,000 and $100,000 enjoyed a cut of 17.7%. This, she said, helped ease the financial burden on working families, allowing them to keep more of their earnings. However, in McEnany's view, Harris's plans could erase these benefits. But this wasn't the only point she raised. Shifting from economic policies to political decisions, McEnany criticized Harris's choice of running mate. According to McEnany, Harris made a significant error by not picking Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, as her vice presidential candidate. McEnany believed Shapiro was a strong contender who appealed to a wide range of voters and could have been key to winning important states like Pennsylvania. Instead, Harris chose Tim Walz, a decision McEnany suggested was based more on choosing a partner who would not challenge her leadership. Even though Walz performed well in polls, McEnany expressed doubts about his ability to win over swing states. McEnany also took a broader look at Harris's economic strategy, highlighting policies she believed could harm the U.S. economy. One of the major issues she discussed was Harris's proposal to raise the corporate tax rate to 28%, in contrast to the Trump administration's decrease to 21%. McEnany argued that lowering the corporate tax rate under Trump had greatly improved U.S. competitiveness, encouraged business investments, and boosted job creation and wages. But, she warned, Harris's plan to increase the tax could reverse these gains, possibly resulting in fewer investments, job losses, stagnant wages, and less innovation. But this wasn't the worst part, according to McEnany. She voiced serious concerns over Harris's plan to tax unrealized gains, the increase in value of assets like stocks or property before they're actually sold. This could be a big issue for entrepreneurs and small business owners, who might find themselves forced to sell assets just to pay taxes on gains they haven't even cashed in on yet. McEnany believed this could lead to serious financial strain and discourage business growth. McEnany's critique didn't just touch on one or two policies, it was a comprehensive look at Harris's economic approach. This willingness to take on major policy issues and break them down in detail shows McEnany's commitment to advocacy and makes it clear that her opinions are more than just fleeting thoughts. They're part of a larger conversation about the future direction of the country's economic policies. Kayleigh described Kamala Harris's approach as extreme and leaning toward the left, suggesting that it might limit new business growth and innovation. She analyzed Harris's performance in the election, noting a lag in key states like Pennsylvania, where Harris's support was 4.3% lower than Joe Biden's numbers in the previous election and 6% behind Hillary Clinton's past performance. She stressed that Harris needed to create her own clear path, separating herself from Biden's strategies, especially in the upcoming debates. McEnany advised Harris to focus on closing the gap in popularity and making her campaign unique. Instead of simply following in the footsteps of past leaders, Harris was encouraged to present something fresh. She also touched on debate preparation, comparing it to Trump's relaxed yet successful approach in 2020. The suggestion was that Trump should highlight issues important to women, noting that Republicans like Marco Rubio and Marsha Blackburn had proposed plans to make childcare more affordable and improve school safety, topics Harris might discuss in her debate. While McEnany's perspective was assertive, she wasn't the only one to voice such opinions. Other commentators supported this stance. For instance, Mark Levin was highly critical of Kamala Harris, questioning her qualifications to serve as vice president and arguing that her rise in politics was due more to political moves, particularly identity politics, than to her qualifications. Levin went further to criticize the media for focusing solely on Harris's achievements while ignoring her flaws, suggesting she was not fit for the role. Levin argued that Harris was shielded from criticism, implying that her race and gender were often used to deflect legitimate scrutiny. He said Harris hadn't made any real accomplishments during her time as vice president and pointed to her sometimes confusing public statements as evidence. Levin also criticized Harris for focusing extensively on issues like abortion at the expense of addressing other urgent matters. But that wasn't the most troubling part, according to Levin. He mocked Harris's handling of the border crisis, questioning her effectiveness as the so-called border czar. Levin suggested that the Democratic Party actively supported Harris's rise by sidelining other potential rivals and shutting down any debate about her qualifications for higher office. He believed this was an orchestrated move by the party to elevate Harris as the future leader, rather than allowing a fair and open competition. Despite Harris stating that she was ready to debate Donald Trump, Levin pointed out her apparent hesitation to face primary challenges within her own party. He argued that Harris's rise was more about identity politics and strategic media portrayal than genuine leadership skills or qualifications. To Levin, her promotion represented deeper issues within the political world, where meaningful discussion is often limited, and political goals take priority over true merit. Levin's critique didn't stop there. He also questioned Harris's record in handling significant responsibilities, particularly in law enforcement and dealing with the southern border crisis. He doubted her credentials as a tough prosecutor, claiming there wasn't enough solid evidence showing her directly managing major cases during her time as San Francisco's district attorney or California's attorney general. In his view, the narrative of Harris as a skilled prosecutor was unsupported by concrete facts. But this wasn't the most significant critique of Harris. Levin also criticized her approach to major national and international issues, particularly her response to anti-Semitism and her position on Israel. He condemned her for not taking a strong enough stand against threats to the Jewish community and for providing vague support for Israel. One of his key criticisms was her decision to skip a speech by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which Levin saw as a move that weakened U.S.-Israel relations and encouraged Israel's adversaries. He believed this raised further questions about Harris's ability to effectively handle critical diplomatic and national security matters. Levin's overall assessment of Harris was that her political journey was more about strategic moves and identity than merit. He expressed concern that political conversations were being stifled and that genuine talent was overlooked in favor of promoting specific agendas. By highlighting gaps in her leadership, particularly on issues of national security, law enforcement, and diplomacy, Levin painted a picture of Harris as lacking the skills necessary for the top levels of leadership. As McEnany reveals concerns about Harris's economic plans, let's hear Mark Levin's perspective on her leadership in crisis situations. Border ineffectiveness. Mark Levin highlighted issues with Kamala Harris's role in managing the border crisis. He pointed out that even though Harris was given a lot of responsibility in this area, there have been very few improvements. To Levin, this was a sign of bigger problems in her leadership, as many important issues remained unsolved during her time in office. He also noted that Harris struggled with public speaking, saying her appearances often lacked clarity and confidence. According to Levin, these weaknesses not only hurt her credibility, but also affected how U.S. leadership was viewed around the world. Levin also talked about what he saw as inconsistencies in Harris's views on law enforcement and criminal justice. He mentioned that Harris had previously taken a tough stance on crime, but now seemed to support more progressive reforms. Levin argued that this shift appeared to be more about political convenience than genuine belief. He suggested that such back-and-forth changes raised questions about her ability to lead with consistency and integrity. This discussion brought to light many challenges in today's political landscape. But that's not all. On another front, Laura Ingraham had her own criticisms of Kamala Harris. She felt that Harris's way of speaking to the American public was almost like an insult to their intelligence, not because of what Harris said directly, but because of how she presented herself. Ingraham argued that Harris often avoided getting into deep discussions about real issues, preferring to stick to simple, catchy phrases and carefully planned appearances. According to Ingraham, these didn't really address the concerns of everyday Americans. For example, Ingraham pointed to one particular interview with Harris that she found to be far too light and lacking in substance. It felt more like a casual chat than a serious political interview. Ingraham jokingly noted that even trivial questions, like Harris's favorite way to relax, would have added more depth to the conversation. She argued that the media's soft approach to Harris was part of a larger pattern where Harris was shielded from the hard questions that other politicians often have to face. Ingraham even referred to a private conversation between Harris and Oprah Winfrey, which she described as overly friendly and far too easygoing. It felt like Harris was being pampered verbally, a far cry from the grilling other politicians like Donald Trump have faced. This wasn't just about the media's gentle treatment of Harris, though. Ingraham compared Harris's carefully managed public persona to Trump's direct and often brash style. To her, Trump's boldness was a sign of honesty and strength. Meanwhile, she believed Harris relied too much on well-rehearsed lines and friendly journalists who never pressed her on the tough topics. Ingraham emphasized that Harris had benefited from this kind of favorable treatment throughout her political career, which made her path to various positions, and now, to running for president, much easier. But this wasn't the worst part, according to Ingraham. She pointed out that Harris had managed to avoid some of the tough challenges faced by past presidential candidates. Many had to endure early primaries in places like Iowa and New Hampshire, meeting skeptical voters and braving the cold while answering difficult questions. But Harris, Ingraham argued, has largely been spared from such trials. Even as she runs for president, Harris has not faced the tough, sometimes hostile press encounters that Donald Trump often endures. Instead, she tends to avoid tough scrutiny and questions on big issues like China, Russia, the economy, and border security. Ingraham was also critical of Harris's use of repetitive catchphrases and what she considered empty statements in her speeches. These often sounded patriotic or called for American pride, but Ingraham questioned their sincerity. She found it odd that Harris now spoke so highly of America, considering her previous criticisms of the country as deeply flawed. To Ingraham, these displays of nationalism seemed disingenuous, appearing to be more about winning votes than expressing genuine beliefs. But there was more at stake than just Harris's speeches. Ingraham took her criticism beyond Harris and accused the media and political establishment of taking part in a larger tactic to protect Harris from real scrutiny and criticism. She argued that this was not only manipulative, but also a disservice to the American public, who deserved open, honest, and transparent discussions about their leaders. Ingraham believed that shielding Harris undermined democracy and prevented meaningful debate about important issues. Ultimately, Ingraham's and Levin's critiques highlighted a concern about the current state of political conversations and the role of the media in shaping public perception. To them, the way Harris was being handled by the media and political establishment raised questions about fairness, transparency, and the future of democratic debate. After exploring Levin's critique, let's see how Ingraham believes Harris's style could influence future political strategies. Flash over substance. Ingraham warns that if Kamala Harris's strategy works, it could set a worrying example for future political contests. If Harris succeeds by using celebrity endorsements, catchy but shallow phrases, and laid-back media appearances, future politicians might follow her lead. Ingraham argues that this approach doesn't just reflect the shortcomings of one politician. It reveals a larger issue within democracy. Voters may find themselves making decisions based on flashiness and popularity rather than on solid facts and policies. But that's not the worst part. Ingraham points to Kamala Harris as the main offender, rather than Donald Trump, who is often known for his blunt and sometimes harsh approach. Harris, according to Ingraham, constantly repeats tired slogans when speaking in scripted media appearances. These phrases don't offer real solutions, and they undermine the intelligence of American voters. Ingraham believes that Harris's campaign is built on empty promises, high-profile endorsements, and a lack of focus on real national issues, which, to her, shows deep disrespect for the American people. Ingraham continues by drawing attention to the gap between Harris's media presence and the actual problems that ordinary Americans face. When you watch Harris in interviews, she seems more concerned with her image than with providing real policy details. She tends to dodge tough questions with prepared but vague responses. For instance, when asked about the growing issue of high living costs, Harris gave a broad answer that was neither specific nor detailed. Instead of addressing the causes of inflation directly or discussing her administration's role, Harris spoke generally about the American dream. Ingraham mocks Harris for blaming outside factors for inflation, while she believes the real cause is the spending policies under Harris and President Biden. To Ingraham, Harris's reluctance to provide clear answers feels both arrogant and dismissive, as if she expects public support without offering real policy solutions. But this pattern goes deeper. Ingraham sees a broader theme in Harris's way of handling both her campaign and governance, avoiding serious issues but still seeking public approval. She criticizes Harris's interview responses, saying they resemble those of a student unprepared for an exam. When faced with tough topics like inflation or border security, Harris tends to reframe the questions, avoiding in-depth answers. One particularly telling moment, according to Ingraham, was Harris's failure to present a clear plan for border security. Instead of laying out a strategy, Harris leaned on cliches and didn't propose any concrete solutions for the crisis at the southern U.S. border. To Ingraham, this highlights Harris's tendency to avoid responsibility and not directly tackle critical issues. Ingraham also criticizes Harris's efforts to reshape her public image through friendly media appearances, such as her interview with Oprah Winfrey. Now, here's a twist. On Oprah's show, Harris tried to shift how the public sees her. She attempted to go from being known as a progressive, anti-gun figure to someone who appears more relatable and grounded. Ingraham ridicules this transformation, comparing it to Harris trying to become a modern Annie Oakley. According to Ingraham, this rebranding is just another attempt to change the narrative without addressing the real issues that people are concerned about. Ingraham is particularly outspoken about Harris's way of connecting with the public, claiming that it's a deliberate strategy to avoid accountability and real discussion on key topics. She accuses Harris of using scripted scenarios, friendly interviews, and overly positive speeches to improve her image, all while steering clear of important issues like crime, economic struggles, and reproductive rights, which significantly affect Americans. But this isn't all. Ingram criticizes Harris for using vague language, highlighting phrases like freedom to be, which she sees as hollow and patronizing, especially during discussions about reproductive rights. Ingram contrasts Harris's focus on such phrases with the genuine concerns of everyday Americans, such as financial instability and public safety. She argues that Harris's emphasis on these talking points distracts from the real lack of achievements during her time in office. Ingram believes that Harris's strategy is designed to mislead the public, sidestepping the tough questions about policies that have direct impacts on the economy and national security. She strongly disapproves of Harris's preference for controlled settings, where she is shielded from difficult, spontaneous questions. This, according to Ingram, prevents any real scrutiny and meaningful interaction with voter concerns. Linking this evasion to a broader effort by political elites to discredit Trump, Ingram points to figures like Alex Soros and Mark Cuban, suggesting that they support actions aimed against Trump. She argues that global elites prefer weak U.S. leadership that focuses more on international interests than on American priorities. Ingram highlights the stark contrast between Trump's direct and assertive style and what she views as Harris's and Biden's avoidance of strong, clear leadership. Ingram's core message is that American leaders need to confront difficult questions and address real issues, like economic instability, border control, and crime, rather than rely on catchy slogans. It seems almost everyone has a criticism of Kamala Harris, shifting the focus to what another prominent Fox anchor, Harris Faulkner, has to say about the situation. Faulkner, a well-known figure at Fox News, has pointed out a significant flaw in Kamala Harris's public interactions: her unpreparedness to address key questions, particularly those related to security and former President Trump. Faulkner is frustrated by Harris's hesitation or inability to provide clear, concise answers, especially on these critical issues. Throughout all this, Ingram emphasizes that the country needs leaders who don't just talk in circles, but offer real, workable solutions to the challenges that Americans face. Thank you for watching. As we examine the diverging leadership styles highlighted by Ingram, do you think global elites are shaping U.S. politics to favor weaker leaders? Leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more insights.